For nearly a year, Chinese Coast Guard ships have maintained an unbroken rotation around Japan's Senkaku Islands, crossing the defense line 25 times in 2025 alone, forcing Tokyo to scramble destroyers in real time. With each incursion, both sides raise the stakes over a cluster of rocks just 105 miles from Taiwan. But why here and why now? The answer begins far beneath the waves. Japan refers to them as the Senkaku Islands, while China calls them Diaoyu. In 1895, the Japanese government formally incorporated the islands after surveys and cabinet orders, placing them under Okinawa Prefecture. The islands sit 105 miles east of Taiwan and 254 miles west of Okinawa, marking a strategic midpoint in the East China Sea. After World War II, the United States administered the islands as part of the Ryukyu chain, maintaining control until 1972. That year, Washington returned administrative authority to Japan, but China has continued to dispute sovereignty ever since. The islands themselves remain uninhabited, but their position is anything but overlooked. In 1969, a United Nations survey identified possible hydrocarbon reserves beneath the East China Sea, turning the waters around the Senkaku Islands into a prize for resource-hungry nations. Today, some of the world's busiest shipping lanes pass within sight of these uninhabited rocks. Automatic identification system data tracks hundreds of commercial vessels transiting daily, linking major ports in China, Japan, South Korea, and beyond. Control over the Senkaku waters means influence over lucrative energy prospects and the ability to monitor or restrict vital trade routes. These economic and strategic realities drive both countries to maintain a constant presence, regardless of the island's barren appearance. Chinese Coast Guard vessels have maintained an unbroken presence in the waters surrounding the Senkaku Islands for 335 consecutive days, according to records from the Japan Coast Guard and the Japan Ministry of Defense. This continuous patrol began in November 2023 and remains active through October 2025, marking the longest sustained deployment in the history of the dispute. Official logs show that Chinese ships have entered Japan's contiguous zone, an area extending 12 to 24 nautical miles from the islands, on almost a daily basis. The tempo of these operations intensified in 2025. By mid-year 2025, there were 25 documented intrusions into Japan's territorial waters, where Chinese vessels crossed the 12 nautical mile limit. Each incident was tracked and reported by Japanese authorities, often resulting in radio warnings and shadowing maneuvers by Japan Coast Guard patrols. The longest single incursion occurred in March 2025, when 2 Chinese Coast Guard ships remained inside territorial waters for 92 hours before withdrawing. These confrontations are recorded in detailed entries that list date, time, vessel identification, and duration, forming a public record of persistent pressure. The operational environment around the Senkaku Islands is now defined by this near constant presence, with Chinese patrols testing response times and procedures. The rhythm of these encounters has shifted from periodic incidents to a daily reality, creating a new baseline for escalation and military readiness in the East China Sea. China's maritime presence near the Senkaku Islands is anchored by a combination of naval and Coast Guard forces. The centerpiece of the Chinese surface fleet in these waters is the Type 052D guided missile destroyer, displacing 7,500 tons. This warship is equipped with advanced air defense systems, anti-ship cruise missiles, and a 130mm main gun. Type 052D's radar and missile suites allow it to track and engage multiple targets at distance, providing both deterrence and command capability for coordinated operations. Supporting these destroyers, the China Coast Guard deploys large patrol vessels armed with 35mm and 76mm deck guns. These cutters, often exceeding 4,000 tons, operate as the visible face of China's sovereignty claims. Their armament, while less sophisticated than naval destroyers, is designed for both warning shots and, under China's 2021 Coast Guard law, potential use against foreign vessels in disputed waters. Coast Guard ships regularly operate in pairs or groups, maintaining a constant presence and shadowing Japanese patrols. Japan's response is built around the Maritime Self-Defense Force, which fields a total of 155 commissioned vessels. Among these are 36 modern destroyers, including the Maya class and the Atago class, both equipped with the Aegis combat system for integrated air and missile defense. Those destroyers are supported by fast-responding patrol craft and surveillance aircraft, forming a layered defense network. The balance of forces in the East China Sea is not only measured in numbers, but in the technical sophistication, firepower, and persistent readiness each side brings to the contested waters. The legal boundaries in the East China Sea are drawn from a web of international conventions and national statutes. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, sets the basic rules. Under Article 3, a country may claim up to 12 nautical miles from its coast as territorial waters. Article 33 creates a contiguous zone, an additional band extending out to 24 nautical miles, where states can enforce laws on customs, immigration, and sanitation. Article 56 grants exclusive economic rights out to 200 nautical miles, but only for resource exploration and use, not for full sovereignty. Articles 17 through 25 outline rights of innocent passage for foreign ships, but allow coastal states to take action if their security or laws are threatened. China and Japan both use these definitions as the foundation for their maritime claims, but national laws add another layer. In February 2021, China enacted its Coast Guard Law, which authorizes the use of force, including weapons, against foreign vessels operating in waters claimed by China. The law's wording covers disputed areas, including the waters around the Senkaku Islands. Chinese Coast Guard vessels are now legally empowered to board, detain, or expel ships they identify as intruders, and to use arms if they judge it necessary to protect what China defines as its sovereignty. Japan's response is guided by its own statutes and official enforcement standards. The Japan Coast Guard operates under the law on the Japan Coast Guard and related maritime security provisions. Official guidelines specify that patrols may warn, intercept, or escort foreign vessels out of Japanese territorial waters, but the use of force is tightly regulated and must be proportional to the threat. Japan's protocols emphasize restraint, but also readiness to escalate if maritime order is threatened. Each encounter around the Senkaku Islands unfolds under these overlapping legal regimes, with every action scrutinized for compliance with both international and domestic law. On March 18, 2025, Japan's Ministry of Defense recorded the first radar contact at 2:13 a.m. local time. Two China Coast Guard vessels crossed into Japan's territorial waters near Uotsuri Island. The incursion lasted for 92 hours, the longest continuous presence since official records began. Within 30 minutes, the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force scrambled the destroyer JS Suzutsuki from its forward deployment near Ishigaki. Ministry logs show that radio warnings were issued at 2:47 a.m. and repeated every hour. At 4:20 a.m., the Japanese Foreign Ministry lodged a formal protest through diplomatic channels in Beijing. China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said that the Diaoyu Islands and their affiliated islands are an inherent part of China's territory, and that Chinese Coast Guard vessels are conducting lawful patrols. By the second day, Japan had reinforced the area with an additional destroyer and two Coast Guard cutters. The Chinese vessels identified as CCG-2301 and CCG-2502 maintained a slow circuit near the islands, at times coming within 4 nautical miles of Japanese patrols. The Ministry of Defense issued a public statement that Japan will take all necessary measures to protect its sovereignty and maritime order. On March 21st, after 92 hours, the Chinese ships withdrew. The U.S. State Department released a statement of support, reaffirming Article 5 of the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty, and said that the United States recognizes the administration of Japan over the Senkaku Islands and stands by its treaty commitments. Official logs from both countries detail each radio exchange, maneuver, and diplomatic note. The incident stands as a procedural demonstration of how legal frameworks, military readiness, and external guarantees are activated in real time during a crisis in the East China Sea. Right now, every maneuver near the Senkaku Islands tests the limits of international law and alliance commitments. As each side hardens its presence, the risk of a miscalculation grows. The standoff is not just about territory, it is about who sets the rules in tomorrow's Pacific. What is your take?